Would you pray with me? Gracious and loving God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts here this morning bring us closer to truly resting in and trusting in the power of your love. Amen. In 2001, Noah's Ark Sanctuary in Georgia was called to retrieve 3 animals that had been owned by a drug dealer. Leo the lion, Shaka Khan, a Bengal tiger, and Baloo, an American black bear. They had all been seriously neglected. The bear was probably one of the worst. It had had a harness on that had been put on it when it was little and never taken off, and it had grown into its skin. They all needed medical attention. And when they brought them back into the sanctuary that they had been brought to, they separated them. They put them in 3 separate enclosures. Natural to think that you wouldn't put together a lion, a tiger, and a bear. 3 natural enemies, right? Well, they were beside themselves. They acted out. They were extremely aggressive with folks who tried to feed them. And finally, they thought, let's just try this. Let's just try putting them all together. And lo and behold, that was what they needed. They ended up calming down. They ended up behaving well. And to this day, they spend their days playing ball together, cuddling, chasing each other, and eating cookies. If 3 natural enemies like those can live together in unity, why can't we? This is the last in our The Tie That Binds series. If you've missed them, I just want to do a quick recap. Week 1 was a reading from Isaiah that talked about how love forms us. Week 2 was the Genesis creation story and about how all of creation is woven together in love. And week 3 was the reading from Ephesians, how God pours out God's love, and we see that in the person of Jesus. And week 4 was a reading from John, the foot washing that Jesus did for the disciples, how love lifts us. And week 5 was the reading from Galatians 5 about only speaking words that build community, not tear them down. Words that move us closer to being that loving presence in the world. And this week, after all those weeks of really lengthy readings, did you kind of like think, did they not finish that? Short and sweet. We are anointed with love. Anointed. What would it look like to you? And this is not a rhetorical question. What would it look like to you for us to live together in unity?
No more metal detectors.
No more metal detectors.
No more bullying.
No more bullying.
Respect for each other.
Respect for each other.
No more refugees.
No more refugees.
Less fear.
Less fear.
Gardens everywhere.
Gardens everywhere. Is there any wonder that image, that we begin the Bible with the image of the Garden of Eden?
No poverty. No poverty.
No poverty. I don't know why, but I think of that. Was it Steppenwolf? Take all the guns and send them into space. We are meant to live in unity with one another. The biblical word is shalom, and it is not just the word peace, the way we usually translate it. Shalom is not the absence of conflict. Shalom is the fullness of really living together in that love we've been gifted with. Shalom is learning to work out the conflicts in a loving way. Shalom is the fullness of what we have all been created for. I mentioned last week that the church is supposed to be like a storm home. You know, the place that in Midwestern towns that they send kids when the blizzard strikes and it's not safe to take the buses home. A refuge from conflict, sadness. And yet, church often ends up not being that. I also shared that happens because we become a member of a church doesn't mean we drop the baggage we came in with. We all carry baggage. Some of it simple slights, some of it deep woundedness. But we all carry baggage into this place. Sometimes our answer when things don't go well and there's conflict is to say, that's it, I've had it, I'm packing up my marbles and I'm going to go play someplace else. Or worse yet, I'm not going to play any place. I'm going to withdraw into isolation. And yet Eugene Peterson says there can be no maturity in the spiritual life, no obedience in following Jesus, no wholeness in the Christian life, apart from an immersion in and an embrace of community. I am not myself by myself. The psalm we heard this morning must seem so out of sync with the world we are experiencing now. It is an ancient psalm of ascent. Scholars like to divide the psalms into categories. I think there's probably about 5. And psalms of ascents were like entrance psalms. They were a song that the people sang as they headed up the hill to worship in the temple in Jerusalem. And this psalm is just suffused with joy, isn't it? What a joy to get to share worship. I think about our greeting time. That's probably the closest thing. That's like a psalm of ascent, okay? We just have so much joy that when we take the lid off of it, we can't put the lid back on. Abundance and unity flow from this psalm. Just dew, not rain, just dew that flows all the way from Mount Hermon to Mount Zion. If you're not familiar with Middle Eastern geography, that's a very long way. And abundance, not just dabbed oil that doesn't just get dabbed on the forehead of Aaron as he's being consecrated to be a priest, and we are all consecrated to be priests of this faith. But it is poured out and flows down into his beard. How have we come to this place in our world that seems so out of sync with this psalm? I would submit that it starts in little ways. If we can't even as a community of faith learn to work out our conflicts, how do we then expect it to happen in the world? It starts with the little things, and then it escalates into the bigger ones. It escalates into this mindset that we find ourselves in: fear, holding tight, circling the wagons. When we look at the world as being a world of scarcity instead of abundance, We are going to hold tight. We are going to hoard. And that doesn't just apply to resources, it applies to time and attention and power. I've said it before, we live in a zero-sum world. Anything given to someone else is something taken away from someone. We have to get beyond that way of thinking, or we are going to continue to face the world the way it is. In this beautiful, short little psalm, we hear that there is no limit set on celebration, no limit on how far blessing can flow, no limit on who can be considered kindred, part of the family. As I watched those images streaming from Paris Friday night, all I could think about was what kind of forces have shaped people into people who would do things like this. Certainly not love, more like a total absence of love. And we need to be really careful about patting ourselves on the back. I know it's a huge continuum, okay? But it starts with those little things. It starts with those unkind words we say to one another right here in our midst. And you know, it graduates up from that. We live very comfortable lifestyles. We aren't part of that oppression. But all you got to do is look at the tag in your clothing. I didn't intentionally do this, but I had several comments on this piece of clothing. It comes from a place in Seattle that every time I go there, I never leave without purchasing a piece of clothing there. It's made by a women's cooperative in Bali. And it's you look at our garment industry. How many of you are familiar with how your clothing is produced? In sweatshops, with child labor. People locked in places to work long hours who end up dying because a fire breaks out and there's no way to get out. We have to be really careful about judging others in the midst of this. We have to always go deep and find that source of love within us, because it is only love that binds. It's only love that can heal that kind of hurt. It's love that allows us to take these hands that are so closed. Think about this. A fist is closed. And open them. Let go. Open them to receive the blessing, and then to remember that we are blessed to be a blessing, not to hoard the love, the resources, or anything else. Did anyone happen to catch the Daily Show? I made reference to it in the epistle, and I don't know if you bothered to look it up. I should have put a link to it. We almost always every evening kind of wind down the day by watching The Daily Show. And this week there was an episode where Trevor Noah interviewed a man named Dan Price. Did anybody see that episode? Go home and Google it and watch it. Price is CEO and owner of Gravity Payments, a credit card processing company. The language he uses at times is not always appropriate, but he said, the credit card processing is like cream of the I can't even find another word, so sorry if this offends you, but the screw you money that gets made in this country. I mean, think back to the 2008 debacle with the finance industry. This is a service industry, okay? A service industry that makes six figures, while other service industries like hotel maids and fast food workers can't even afford to feed their families. Price was hiking with a friend whose rent had just gone up, and it had gone up by $200, and he was thinking, that's not that big of an increase. No, not that big of an increase for somebody who makes $1.2 million a year, right? And yet she was making not much above $15 an hour. She was making what some of the lower workers in his company made. That's where he began to make the connections. And this was going to absolutely devastate her finances. He went back to his company and really kind of rethought things, and he restructured the pay scale in his company. He dinged himself first. I don't know what he's making now, but it's not $1.2 million. And he ended up giving everybody, the base pay. You can make more, but the base pay for everyone was $70,000. And as I listened to him, I thought, oh my goodness, there's the parable of the vineyard workers, where the one that starts at the beginning of the day gets paid the same as the one at the end of the day. But you want to know something? He lost people from the company. People who'd said, I worked hard to get a college degree, and now I'm making the same thing that a person with a high school degree makes. Forget it, I'm out of here. So he said, I'm not perfect. This isn't perfect. It's still a work in progress. And Trevor Noah says, are you a socialist? And he says, I really don't like labels. I don't like labels. And he went on to explain that our economic system is set up to extract the most, to pay those who work for you the least amount, to charge the people you provide a service to the most so that you can take the most. And we wonder why the world looks the way it does. So he went on to talk about the fact that socialism requires the government intervene and level the playing field. He said, it's time we business owners began to think differently, to be guided by different principles. And he said, there's this magical force called love that has the ability to transform how we do business, how we live in the world. Love has that power. And Trevor Noah looked at him and he said, you're a young man, you have long hair, you have a beard, you like to share with people. Have we met before? Wouldn't it be wonderful if we really did put these principles of love into place? Hopefully, through this series, The Tie That Binds, you've seen that there really is only one force that has that kind of power to transform us, this community, our world. And that's love. How about we work just a little harder right here at opening our closed hands and our closed hearts to that power? Imagine what that might look like.